Rencana Perlindungan dan Pengelolaan Lingkungan Hidup atau RPPMU merupakan suatu instrumen lingkungan hidup yang penting dalam perlindungan dan pengelolaan lingkungan hidup. Di Indonesia, RPPMU diatur dalam Peraturan Pemerintah Nomor 22 Tahun 2021 tentang penyelenggaraan perlindungan dan pengelolaan lingkungan hidup sebagai perencanaan yang memuat potensi, masalah, dan upaya perlindungan dan pengelolaan mutu udara dalam kurun waktu tertentu. RPPMU merupakan dokumen yang menjadi hasil proses perencanaan perlindungan dan pengelolaan mutu udara setelah melakukan inventarisasi, penetapan status udara ambien, dan penetapan wilayah perlindungan dan pengelolaan mutu udara. Pengelolaan mutu udara memiliki tantangannya sendiri, mengingat mudahnya zat pencemar udara terdispersi, bahkan melampaui batasan-batasan administratif. Lebih lanjut, meskipun telah diimplementasikan di beberapa negara, RPPMU merupakan instrumen yang relatif baru dan perlu dikembangkan di Indonesia. ICEL berkesempatan untuk mendengarkan pendapat dari Adrian Martinez, Adjunct Professor of Law at the University of California, Los Angeles, mengenai pengalamannya dalam mengawal perencanaan pengelolaan mutu udara di Amerika Serikat. Wawancara ini diharapkan dapat memberikan gambaran mengenai peran, implementasi, dan proses penyusunan RPPMU, sehingga dapat memberikan gambaran dan catatan untuk pengaturan lebih lanjut dan implementasi dari negara yang telah mengimplementasikannya sejak lama. Khususnya mengenai pentingnya peran pemerintah pusat dan akses partisipasi publik dalam perencanaan, perlindungan, dan pengelolaan mutu udara.
An air quality management plan is basically a roadmap to clean air, and it sets out a couple things. One is generally there's what's called an air quality standard. In the United States, we call them National Ambient Air Quality standards, and that's the level of pollution that's safe to breathe with an adequate margin of safety. And so they do that for a wide range of pollutants. So some of those pollutants are ground level ozone, fine particulate matter, coarse particulate matter, lead, carbon monoxide, and other pollutants like that. And an air quality management plan explains how are you going to meet that standard in a particular region, state, or country by a certain deadline, whatever your deadline to meet it. So that's what the air quality management plan is. It's a very important roadmap or blueprint to achieving clean air. And we really rely on them in places like California, where I live, as the basis for getting governmental entities and other entities to clean up pollution. Participation is vital in air planning, and there are many reasons for that. First, a lot of the technical information gets aired publicly, so people can weigh in on whether the plan is getting information correct. So that's kind of one important piece. Also, I think it's really important that people be able to weigh in on what strategies are most important and going to be most beneficial to achieving whatever air standard you have. And so in a world where you might have multiple ways that you can clean the air to meet the standards, this public participation allows people to explain, we prefer that you clean up coal plants or cars or trucks, or we should do this first or this second. So it's really important for the sequencing of information and kind of your plan. And then I think the other kind of key piece is it helps people understand why the government or whatever agency is doing this work. The more robust the public participation, the more greater understanding you have of air pollution. And finally, the kind of key piece of that, in places like California, we do have some programs that try to rely on the public to help clean the air. So, for example, when we are having high pollution days, they encourage people not to do fires in their chimney or different things like that. And that requires public participation, public information. The public needs to be aware that these programs exist and that this is happening. So in the United States, how it's structured is the federal government sets the standards, the national ambient air quality standards, and then state and local governments develop the plans to meet those standards. But the federal government still plays an important role. It has to approve all the state plans to meet the standards to make sure they meet the minimum criteria of federal law. And so, the federal government's very engaged in this. And then kind of other important piece that our federal government plays is it adopts nationwide emission standards and other strategies to clean pollution, just because it's better to do it on a nationwide scale. That might be large truck standards or car standards or power plant standards. Sometimes the Environmental Protection Agency is doing that nationally. And so a lot of emissions reductions come from those federal programs. Yeah, well, I think deadlines are critical in air planning, and one is in the U.S., the state and local governments have 3 years after they're designated what's called non-attainment, which means they're not meeting a standard, to produce the plans. And so I think that deadline is critical because that's the real moving force to get the state governments to adopt their plans. The other key piece is the federal government sets deadlines by which you have to meet the clean air standards. And that's another important and critical piece of air planning, because without a deadline, sometimes regulations and other strategies can just languish for many years. And the deadlines play an important role to help, focus efforts to clean the air. That's an important part of the US-based system, is that there's enforcement if progress is not being made or plans aren't implemented. And so there's 2 levels of enforcement here. One is the federal government can take action to enforce the failure to adopt or implement plan parts or do what they're supposed to do. The second piece is citizens can also file their own lawsuits. So it really empowers local people who are breathing to engage in this process and make sure that the federal government is, or the state government or whomever, is doing what they're supposed to be doing. So here's some lesson learned here is, in our laws where we do have loopholes or places where it's not clear, we found that a lot of governmental entities and a lot of polluting industries have really capitalized on those. And what it does is it really makes it hard to actually meet clean air standards. So in a place like Los Angeles, we're having problems actually meeting the standards because of long delays and some other kind of ways that the law was structured that effectively make it harder to meet these standards on time. One thing we've found is the other kind of key piece on public participation, and one of the places where I've seen a lot of people have a lot of success, is weighing in when the air plan is not enforceable, it's not clear, it's vague. And in those instances, that's really not what you want. You want as much clarity in your air plan as possible, because you want to be able to make sure state actors do what's necessary to clean the air. And so we spend a lot of time going through air plans, making sure that every piece of it is enforceable. It has emission reductions commitments, it has timelines, it has very clear language on what's covered, what the technology solutions are. And so I think that's an important piece that, even in the US, where we've had our Federal Clean Air Act since the 1970s, and only a couple major revisions, these are things we're still working on. So it does take time. But I think, what I found is when you have a lot of public participation, the plans are just better. In 2016 in LA, we had a ton of public participation, and a lot of the measures were stronger. And we're able to kind of really push forward and get more accountability and make sure that the government is doing what it promised us it would do. So, I think that's kind of how the lesson learned, the public participation, it all kind of comes together to be just one of the most vital parts of a clean air plan, because otherwise I think oftentimes people will produce plans that might read well or look nice on the paper, but lack the ability to actually clean the air and protect people's health by the deadlines.